Good morning, everyone. It's Katrina from the Alluring Bead Boutique. Welcome back to my design channel. So over on my blog, I am continuing on with Bead Weaving 101 as we work through all of the stitches in the 2019 Bead and Button Bead Stitching Handbook, and currently we're working on brick stitch. And so I've completed all of the the basic lessons. We have went over flat brick stitch that naturally decreases. We have went over flat brick stitch with an increase so that you can create beadwork that has an even number of beads on each row. We also went over tubular brick stitch. And we've even done a tutorial on creating a continuous spiral using tubular brick stitch. And so now we're working into the more advanced techniques using the stitch. Today we're going to go over how to do brick stitch on a frame. This is going to be a series of 3 short videos. The first video, I'm just going to show you how to put the beads on the outside of the frame. In the second video, I'm going to show you guys how to take a smaller bead and do your second row. So for that, you'll have to use the increasing technique in order for your beads to come out looking even all along the edge above the first row, and you won't have any noticeable gaps. And also how to keep all of the beadwork on plane with the actual component, which is this little metal ring. And then in the third part, we're going to learn about how to go back and add beads to the inside of the frame. Okay, so let's take a look at what we're going to use today. And all we really need for today is our ring. And I'm going to be using some 8/0 beads. And these are turquoise Picasso Miyuki 8/0s. I have a size 10 beading needle and some .006 fire line threaded on to work through all 3 parts of adding these beads onto the frame. You're probably going to need about a good wingspan and a half, maybe 2 wingspans of thread on your needle, unless of course you want to just, if you're uncomfortable working with that, you can always add thread later. So the bead frames that I use, I get over at Joann's, and they come in these packs of all various assortments and several different metal finishes. The one I'm using, they're soldered closed, which is going to make it a whole lot easier if you want to do brick stitch on them. They need to kind of be closed. This one is 30 millimeters in diameter. And like I said, the little packs that I get at Joann's, they have a wide assortment, and like they'll have 3 different sizes of these plain. These ones are made with square wire. You can see it has a nice flat edge here, and a flat edge on the inside. So that is made with square wire. So my thread today is a little bit long because basically I am going to be making the mate to this particular one I did yesterday to take pictures for part of this part of the post over on my website. So the first thing you're going to want to do is tie your thread onto your bead frame. So what you do is you just tie 2 overhand knots and leave yourself a little bit of a thread. You're going to want to weave this thread in later or to tie a knot with your working thread. You have to have at least enough to move this thread through a few beads before you cut it off. So I've got 2 overhand knots tying my thread to the frame. And so now I'm ready to start my brick stitch. So when we were working with brick stitch on a frame or another bead, well, not necessarily on another bead, but on the frame, we will be using, the frame will be constitute our thread bridges, which we normally use for brick stitch. Normally we would start with a ladder stitch of beads, and we would use the thread bridges along the top of the ladder to add our first row of brick stitch. But since we are working with the frame, we don't necessarily need a ladder stitch base. So what we'll do, we will pick up 2 beads, because if you remember from our regular brick stitch basics, unless you're doing a tubular spiral where you're automatically stacking 2 beads up for the second row, you're going to have to always start your first row with 2 beads. So let me see if I can get myself a little bit better in frame here. So I'm picking up these 2 beads I've got my tail thread situated to the front towards myself right here. And I'm going to hold it out of my way. I've got my 2 beads on and I've dropped them down. I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to come through the frame. And what I'm going to do is going to pinch my fingers right here along that frame to try to keep those 2 beads from coming through the circle. And sometimes it's a little fidgety when you get started, but you can do it. It's not that hard. So once you get the beads looking like this is the first bead I picked up because it's closest to the tail thread. This is the second bead. So we always come up through the second bead first. And now I'm working on the front side of this bead frame. I pass my needle from back to front, and now I'm going up through the bead on the front side of the frame. Now I'm going to go ahead and straighten out my first bead. You don't have to do this step. If you want, you can wait till the end when you connect the last bead to this first bead. I like to straighten mine up at the start, so I'm going to pass right down through the first bead. And I apologize for the long thread, but things happen. And then I'm going to come up back through that second bead so I can get into position, step up, and get ready to add my next bead. And so now my 2 little beads are sitting really nice side by side. So now I'm going to work 1 bead at a time, just like we normally do with any form of brick stitch. So I'm going to pick up a bead, and opposed to dropping it all the way down and then coming through the hoop with my needle, what I'm going to do is I have the bead on my needle, and you can see how I'm holding this hoop. I'm going to take the needle just like this and come under the hoop, and I'm going to hold on really tight right there so that the bead doesn't slip through the hoop. And then I'm just going to pull the thread till the bead pops into position right beside the second bead. Going to come up on the front again. I'm going to pass up through that bead. If it gets a little loose, don't worry about it, because as you pull your thread through, it will tighten over and sit right next to the bead beside it. When you're pulling your thread through, you want to pull that thread straight up from the top, like that, when you get to the end. All right, so let's do a couple more. I'm going to pick up my bead. I'm going to hold my finger here on the frame. I'm going to keep that bead from popping through if I can. And sometimes it does. And if it does, you just need to reposition it. Like, see, it just now popped through. So I'm just going to let it drop through the hoop, pinch again, and come up with my finger. So right there. So now I just come through the bead on the front side of the hoop. And pull my thread straight out. And then we have that bead. Let's do a couple more. I won't make you guys watch me do this whole hoop because it's basically just repetition till you get all the way back around. So let's do one more. We're going to bring that from back to front through the hoop. Let the bead fall into position right there. Then I'm going to come through the bottom to top on the front side of the beadwork. Pull my thread. Pull it straight up, just like that. So here's a couple of things to note. You want to try to keep your tension as even as possible so you don't have big loopy threads here on your top thread bridges. You want them all to look really similar and nice and connected, but not pulled so tight that you pull the beads off of the plane of this frame. And by that, what I mean is the plane runs this way. So basically, you can check your work by turning the frame on its end and making sure that you don't have any huge gaps and that all of your beads are lining up really nicely on the edge of the frame. So if we look back at my earring over here, if I turn this earring on its side, you will see that all of the beads, even the accent beads down here, lie perfectly on the plane of my hoop. And that's the main goal we're looking at. We don't want a bunch of beads poking out on either side of the frame and looking all weird. So let's do one more. Pick up a bead, come from back to front through the hoop. Well, I'll get my thread knotted just a little bit. Hold on, folks. Okay, so now I am ready to go up from bottom to top on the front side of this bead frame. So I'm just going to continue working until I've added beads all the way around this frame. And I'm going to try to keep my tension nice and even. I don't want any gaps. I want all of my beads to sit beside each other with the same amount of thread showing between each one. All right, so let me go ahead and bead my way around the hoop, and I'll come back and talk to you guys about how to close this up. So, as you can see, I only have a few beads left here to do, but I wanted to come back and show you, give you a couple of tips. So, first up, check your work often to make sure that you're staying on the plane and that you're not over pulling the thread and pushing your beads off to either side of the bead frame here. If you make a mistake and you need to pull a bead off, it's really easy. All you do is loosen up your beads one at a time. You want to pass back through that bead to, first of all, get rid of the part where you came up through it on your step up. And because we're working on the bead frame, all we would have to do is come right back through the frame and then take the bead off of the thread. And we could reposition it or whatever we needed to do. So let me finish up these last few beads. So now I'll have to put 4 on because I took one off. And I'll be right back and show you guys how to close this up. So when you're working with brick stitch on a frame, the number of beads that you're going to need basically depends on the size of the frame. It also depends on the type of project that you're going to do. So if you're going to, say I was going to come back through and embellish right off of this frame, depending on my embellishments and my accent beads, I may need this number to be divisible by 2 or divisible by 3. Most of the times I like to have an even number of beads on the base row. That way when I go into designing, I don't have to do a lot of complicated math to try to figure out where exactly to start putting my embellishments. But also, as you're adding your last few beads, you're going to want to make sure that, see, if I were to try to close this up right here, I'm going to have a huge gap of thread between these 2 beads. So I know that I can fit one more bead in here. But you can test it by putting a bead on also and dropping it down to the beadwork. And by dragging it across like this, you can make sure that that bead is going to stand up and fill your gap without overfilling it. If it overfills the gap, when you turn it up this way, that last bead is going to poke off to the right or to the left, and it's not going to be, sitting on the same plane, and it's going to make your beadwork look pretty funky and clunky. So let me put this last bead. And for this 30 millimeter frame, the magic number of 8/0s with these Miyukis turned out to be 34 beads. So now I'm going to have this bead into position right here where it belongs. You can see that it's sitting really nice on the plane, and everything looks really good on this one. So let me come out just a little. I'm going to show you guys how to close this beadwork. So every single one of these beads so far has a thread bridge at the top between each 2 beads, and then the other thread bridge runs along the bottom under the frame. But we're not going to go under the frame again. We're going to create a thread bridge here at the top, and we're going to put the final thread bridge at the bottom of these 2 beads, and that's going to connect those beads and do what's called closing the beadwork. So the working thread is exiting the top of my very last bead. I'm going to take my needle and come down from top to bottom through the very first bead on the row. Now pull that through. And then now I'm exiting the bottom of the first bead. I'm going to take my needle and come right back up through the bottom of my last bead. But before I pull that through, I'm going to grab this thread right here. You can see that when I go to push up on this bead, it loosens up that top thread bridge. Let me get my needle in here. You see how that thread loosened up right there? Just go ahead and take your hand over here and pull that down and hold it with your fingers. Now pull the thread through from bottom to top through that very last bead. And now you can let go. And then pull it nice and snug. And you have closed the beadwork and you're ready to continue on, either coming inside and adding a row, adding another row on the outside, or whatever it is that you want to do with your project. Okay, so that is it for this short little video on how to add beads to the outside of the frame. When we come back next time, I'm going to show you guys how to add a second row, only we're going to step down to a smaller size bead, so we're going to have to use some increasing in order to get our beads to fill up this, the space created by the larger beads. It's going to naturally increase anyhow because we're working outwards in a circle. So we'll go over that in the next little short video related to our brick stitch on a frame. All right, guys, thanks for watching. Head over to the Alluring Bead Boutique and make sure you're following the blog over there. Subscribe to my channel and have a great day.